Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. I'm your host, Martin Leonard, the FSI Director for Concur in EMEA. And our webinar today will focus on reducing costs and gaining greater control of your supplier invoices today with our global partner, VATBox. I'll give you a brief introduction to our speakers today. With us, we have Imran Gohar, our Senior Solution Consultant here at SAP Concur. And joining him will be Remkar Dwarheit, the VP of Tax and Product Strategy for VATBox. The agenda for today will be covering the challenges that your typical company such as yours will see in the AP process. Then we're going to give you an overview and a demo of our Concur invoice solution. Next, we'll be talking about securing the VAT recovery on AP invoices and how you can do that as an organization. Finally, we'll be covering the benefits of linking a company like SAP Concur with the invoice link on our App Center. And finally, we'll be covering questions and answers that you may have during the invoice webinar today. Now I'll be kicking off and passing it over to Imran Gohar. Imran, are you there?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Martin. So first of all, welcome everyone. My name is Imran Gohar. I'm a Senior Solution Consultant here at SAP Concur. So as Martin mentioned, I'm just going to take you through very high level on some of the challenges that we see within an accounts payable department. And then we're going to go into the system and also show you how the Concur system works and what value proposition we have as a solution. And then how the system works in conjunction with VATBox to deliver a lot of savings and reduce the amount of work and effort that an accounts payable team has to perform when it comes to managing VAT information and also managing their invoices. Let's kick off. Now, when we talk to different accounts payable managers or when we go into different accounts payable departments, we do find that all these accounts payable people are under a perpetual pressure. And that perpetual pressure stems from processing all these documents that are coming in from the vendors. And there are different challenges that are associated with that. Now, if you were to go down and look at those challenges, we can actually put them into three buckets. The first one is invoice processing. So today, if you look at an accounts payable department, you'll find that they still receive a lot of invoices as paper documents, which in itself generates a lot of problems. And some of those could be because AP has to manage those documents. They have to be sorted, they have to be archived, and then they have to be stored for a certain period of time because your auditors might request those documents. But then on top of that, once those paper documents actually go out into the business, they tend to get lost and you cannot track those documents. Who's approving it, where in the approval workflow they are, whether it's sitting with a manager for how long it's sitting with a manager. So these types of visibility is not available to AP. Now that results in a lot of frustration, and also when the vendor calls, AP is unable to give them a status update on their vendor payment. Now, because you have a very paper-driven environment, or if you don't have visibility into those invoices and you cannot chase those invoices, downstream it causes additional issues because then you end up doing late payments on those invoices. You cannot you miss out on different discounts, and then also you have a very unhappy vendor to deal with because obviously they want to get paid and they want to get paid quickly. But if the invoice doesn't get approved on time, then those payments would get delayed. Now, if you were to look at the second bucket, which is around productivity and reporting, then there are different challenges there. I mean, if you look at the activities that an AP clerk does within an AP department, you'll find that they're wasting a lot of time on non-business critical activities. And that could be, for example, chasing the managers for approvals. That could be, for example, trying to determine if an invoice is a duplicate invoice, or that could also be trying to report on specific invoice data to basically give to managers. Now, the challenge there is again to do with the invoicing, because the invoices come in, the AP is not able to track those invoices. Obviously, they have to month-end or year-end activities require everything to be fully logged, and you need to understand whether invoice is paid or not paid to be able to account for it within your reports. And then on top of that, to pile on the pressure, AP is also expected to make sure that the tax information on the invoice is valid. So not only that for the goods and services that were procured, they have to check whether the vendor has calculated the right tax amounts, but on top of that, they also have to determine if it's a foreign supplier invoice, then is there a tax recharge that needs to take place, whether there's a withholding tax that has to be calculated, or if there is a VAT reclaim option, then what is that VAT reclaim amount? So these types of activities then also sit on AP's plate. Now, from a compliance and regulation perspective, there is additional workload that AP have to do. And a good example is the duty to report legislation in the UK. So very recently, this legislation was introduced, and basically accounts payable departments now have to report to the government or HMRC or the tax authorities here in the UK information regarding what is their payment terms with their vendors, when did they receive invoices from their vendors, and when did they pay that invoice, and when was the payment done to the vendor, because the government is now closely tracking how companies pay their vendors, and if they do not pay vendors on time, then what were the reasons around not paying those vendors on time. So looking at this, the tax and regulatory aspect also then adds a lot of challenges to AP's workload. Now, the big question is, how do you solve these challenges? So one way is to leverage technology, and that is where Concur Invoice and VATBox come in. So if you use a solution like Concur Invoice or VATBox, then there are a couple of things that we allow you to do. The first thing is the system will allow you to unify your finance and tax data. So if you have all of that information in a single repository, you can report from it. You can run real-time actionable, you can gain real-time actionable insights from that data. And then that could also highlight any bottlenecks and inefficiencies in your process. But that can only happen if all of your data is digitized and it is available in real time to the users that need to see that information. Now, most companies would have an ERP system at the back end, and there is this trend to move towards the cloud. So again, because SAP Concur and VATBox both are cloud-based technologies, so this can expand your current digital transformation strategy and then give you a solution that can be accessible from anywhere at any time. There's very low total cost of ownership on your organization from an IT hardware and software perspective, because everything is hosted in the cloud and it's managed by Concur and VATBox. Now, if you have a best-of-breed solution that syncs seamlessly with your backend ERP system, and basically it's acting as a bolt-on on top of the ERP system, it will definitely accelerate your organizational performance. And the reason I say that is because the backend systems are very good for back office operations. So your ERP system would give you all of the information that you need from an accounting perspective, from an enterprise resource planning perspective. But when it comes to front-end experience, then these systems tend to be very difficult to use. So that is where a solution like Concur Invoice or VATBox come in, because these solutions have been built with the end user in mind. And then on top of that, because they are not license-driven cost models, they are more subscription-driven. So depending on the amount of volumes of invoices that go through these systems, you'll get charged accordingly. You can actually roll out these solutions to every person within your organization, and therefore be able to give them insight into the data, be able to process invoices more efficiently, and then as a result, reduce costs accordingly. So the proof is in the pudding, and the business value of the Concur invoice solution is demonstrated on this slide. So what we did was we sort of we did a research using IDC with our customer base to understand what was the return of investment for using or deploying a solution like Concur Invoice. So as you can see, we were able to determine that 66,000 duplicate invoices were prevented by our clients from going through. They were able to reduce the average cycle times from around about 20 days, 20 to 15 days to 5.8 days, because invoices were flowing through the workflow more efficiently. We processed around 5 million invoice transactions in one single day through the Concur invoice solution. And then overall, $4.6 billion worth of vendor spend has already gone through the Concur employee spend management platform. There are other stats below, but I'll just highlight a couple of them. So here, basically, we saw that the late payments to vendors, those were reduced 67%. And when it came to compliance and procurement policy adherence, then companies were able to hit 99% compliance. And that's because instead of someone looking at the invoice and trying to determine whether that invoice is compliant with a particular regulation or with a particular policy, the system is doing that analysis. And if any invoice does not meet that compliance status or that compliance requirement, the system is automatically highlighting those invoices to accounts payable. Right, so talking a little bit about the Concur Employee Spend Management Platform, as we call it. So the platform is formed of 3 core modules. So we've got an expense management module, we've got a travel booking module, and then we've got the invoice management module. Now, the expense management module allows your users to submit their expense claims, and therefore it allows accounts payable to manage the expenses reimbursement process. The travel module allows your users to book travel online, so it provides an online booking tool that can easily give them all the choices when booking travel. And then the invoice management module allows you to manage all of the different invoices that are being received from the vendors within the Concur system. Now, what's the benefit of having these 3 modules on the same platform? One of the biggest one is it's a single user interface for the end user. They just need to log in to the system once, and they can access all of these modules straight from there. On top of that, it's completely modular, so you can decide that how you deploy the modules. So for instance, you might deploy the expense module to all of your business units, but you might deploy the invoice module to just the UK business unit. Everything is hosted in the cloud, so it's a completely cloud-based solution. Now, all the data is consolidated in a single repository, both from an expense perspective and an invoice perspective. The benefit of that is that if you need to do consolidated spend reporting, and what I mean by that is if you want to track all of your purchase categories and you want to see the spend that's happening both from an expense management perspective as well as a vendor invoice management perspective, you can do these consolidated spend reporting and then be able to track your total spend irrespective of whether it was received via expense claims or whether it came in via a vendor invoice. You will be able to get a complete figure around how much you're spending on a particular purchase category using the data in the repository. Now, the solution is highly scalable, so you can start small and then expand. So it can very easily grow with your business, and you can expand it out to different regions. It is a global solution, so it does support, it supports multi languages across the world, and then it's quick to deploy. And the great thing about the Concur platform is that when you deploy one of the modules, you have pretty much done 40% of the work for the other modules. So I think when you deploy the second module, it's a lot quicker because the underlying structure is already there. Your hierarchies, your user profiles would already be built, and therefore it's a very quick turnaround on the implementation of the system. Now, if you were to look at the process that the Concur system will manage and how it will help you streamline your invoice processing within the accounts payable department, then I've got this workflow that I will take you through and explain how we do it within the system, and then we're going to look at the system itself in real time. So your incoming invoices, they can be received within the Concur system as either paper documents or as email PDF attachments. We also have interfaces that allow us to import invoices coming in via the e-invoicing format. So like if you receive invoices as EDI or CXML formats, then we can import those files as well. But looking at the first one here, so if you receive invoices in maybe a centralized AP mailbox from your vendors as email PDFs, then we can directly import those invoices into Concur using email addresses. So we will issue you your email address that you can forward those invoices to. If you're receiving paper documents today, you can decide whether you want to process that paper in-house using local scanners. So you scan the document to a PDF or an image file, or you can outsource the whole scanning process to Concur as well. So we provide outsourcing options in that case as well. And the great thing is that our service centers are owned by Concur ourselves and are run by us as well. So it's not a third-party person that's handling the paper documents on our behalf. Now, once you scan those paper documents to a PDF documents, you can upload them into Concur as as PDFs, or you can email them directly from the scanner into the Concur data capture module. Then once the invoice goes into the data capture module, we can do document separation. We can capture the invoice data from that image using OCR technology. So we capture both header and line level data. And our OCR engine is fully integrated in the platform, so you don't need to install any software on a computer somewhere. On top of that, once the data has been captured, it will be verified within the system. And that verification of data is done by us as well. So we basically ensure that what data the OCR has extracted from the invoice image is accurate and is correct. And if there are changes that need to happen, then we make those changes on your behalf. Now, once the invoice is released, it can be either sent centrally. So all those invoices or digital invoices can be sent to AP. And then AP can decide where those invoices need to be routed to or workflowed to. Or we could also put in logic that allows us to workflow invoices directly to invoice owners. So this could be based on purchase order number. This could be also based on the vendor and also contact reference on the invoice. Now, once invoices are routed to people who need to code them, they can be coded and then matched to purchase order or good receipt. And once that's done, they can go into the approval workflow for approval. Now, once invoices so for purchase order invoices, if they match successfully, they can workflow straight into your ERP system for payment. But if it's a non-purchase order invoice, then yes, that needs to be authorized, in which case we do configure your delegation authority matrix in the system, and we workflow the invoice based on that to the right manager or managers for approval. Now, those managers can approve those documents using mobile device, or they can go into the web browser and use the web interface to approve those invoices. And once they're fully approved, they will come back to AP for a final accounting review before they get posted in your finance system for payment. And then once you pay your vendor, we can pull back payment confirmation data back into Concur as well. Now, we do have also got a supplier portal that you can roll out to your vendors, which gives them a window into the Concur system to see the status of their invoices. So it significantly reduces the amount of calls AP receive from vendors. Now, apart from posting invoices to the finance system, we can also pass data, invoice data, and image files or the digital images to our partner VATBox. And what VATBox can do is they can do VAT validation and VAT reclaim checks on that invoice. So this is the value-added services that we can deliver to our partners. And what that allows you to do is to have your data analyzed on that invoice and then get an understanding of, okay, if these invoices are foreign supplier invoices, then what is the VAT reclaim possibility on these invoices? what are the VAT recharge requirements around this invoice, and also if the data on the VAT needs to be validated, that can be done by VATBox. Now, the big beauty of the Concur platform is that it is built on an open API architecture, which basically means that it allows us to basically connect with other value-added service providers, and we have got a massive partner ecosystem. And this is just a snapshot of that, of the number of partners that we have. And the reality is that Concur can deliver very, very great and nice functionalities, but we cannot do everything. So what this ecosystem allows us to do is to leverage the great technology and the expertise of our partners in their specific domains, and therefore add additional value to the system or to our customers through the partner network. And therefore, you can actually gain even more benefits and cost savings as a result of that. And as you can see, that VATBox is one of our tax management partners listed here. Okay, so that was everything I wanted to cover from a slide perspective. So what I'll do now is take you through the Concur system and just give you a quick sneak preview of how everything works. Just come out of my presentation. Okay, so what I'll do is I'm going to log into the Concur system as different roles and just give you an idea of what those different people would see when they log in. So this is the Concur platform login page. I'm going to log in as this user, Emma, who is a business user, and she might be someone sitting in your IT department, marketing department, or operations department. So when this user logs in, depending on the modules that have been activated for her, they will show up here at the top. So this user can do purchase requests, she can submit expense claims, and she can also process invoices. On top of that, she can see full visibility of our workload, and this concept we call work towards zero. So basically, we give the user a visibility of how many different documents are sitting in the different queues. In this case, this user has 3 purchase requests that she needs to submit. She's got 5 invoices that she needs to process. She's got 21 expenses, and these are the different expenses that she has incurred. And she's got 4 open expense claims. So she needs to submit these expense claims and therefore have them approved. So it's a one-stop shop for full visibility of all your documents within Concur. Now, if I take on the role of a user, then what is important for me when it comes to invoice processing? So the thing that's important for me is I need to see all the details on that invoice. So if I go into this, the payment request, the queue, on top of that, I also want to see the image of the invoice. I want to be able to code that invoice to the right cost centers, to the right GL account codes. So these are some of the activities that are important to me as an end user. So in this queue, I can see all the invoices that have been automatically sent to me by the system because the logic has determined that I need to be looking at these invoices. And I can see there are 3 purchase order invoices and there are 2 non-purchase order invoices in my queue. The purchase order ones, you can see the system try to match them to a purchase order. And then it's showing me the results of that matching process. And then I've got 2 non-PO invoices. So if I were to just open up this Zinio one and have a look at this, the great thing here is from an end user perspective, I've got the invoice image, I've got all the data already captured by the OCR and nicely displayed to me. And then on top of that, I can very quickly do cost allocation on the line items if I need to do that. So here I can select my line items. I can go here and I can say, okay, this has to be cost allocated across 50% of the cost should go to this business unit, and then 50% should go to maybe a different business unit. So I can define that and then save this. And then if I show distribution, you'll see that the system has now distributed that cost equally across those cost centers. In addition, the system will try to automatically determine the GL account codes that need to be assigned to each line item based on the expense type. So the system will try to automate some of the coding for me. Now, once I'm happy with this invoice, I can now say, okay, this can go into the approval workflow for approval. So I can click the submit button And this invoice is now in the approval workflow. Now, another thing I want to do is once I have sent the invoice into the approval workflow, I can then after I've submitted it into the approval workflow, I can also track that invoice. So I can go in here and I can see where that particular invoice went. So here the Zinio one is sitting with my manager Graham for approval. If I were to just quickly switch to Graham, and here I've already got my mobile device on. I'm sharing my screen on the mobile device. So if I'm a manager and I'm always on the move, then I would most likely want to be able to look at my approval queue on the move. I want to see all my invoices on the mobile app. So what I can do is I can download the Concur mobile app, which is native to the Android and iOS operating systems. I can log into the app, and here you can see that I can look at all my invoices that are waiting my approval. So this is all documents. So I can approve my expense claims from this. I can approve purchase requests. I can approve invoices. So in the invoice approvals queue, I can see all the invoices that are waiting my approval. Here I can open up the invoice. I can see all the details. If I need to read comments on that invoice, I have full access to comment screen. I can look at the line items on that invoice, and I can also look at the invoice image. I can open up and I can see the different image documents, and I can increase or reduce the size as well. So as a manager, I've got everything here to make a decision whether I will approve this invoice or whether I'll reject this. So if I decide to approve, I'll click the approve button. The system is going to say, do you want to add a comment or not? And then approve. It's as simple as that, because I've got everything here to make that decision to approve or reject an invoice. Another thing that's important to me as a manager is to be able to track my my budget, my spend. So here under the budgets, I can actually track all of my budget data. So for example, it could be your fiscal budget information, or it could be the project-driven budget. So here I can go into each of my budget areas, and I can see how much we are spending month by month, how much was budgeted for this. In this case, 20,000 was budgeted. We have already spent 9,400, and there's pending 1,000 sitting with managers for approval. So this is real-time tracking of all of your spend within the Concur system that a manager would have visibility on the mobile device. And I can also look at my purchase categories, etc., that I'm spending money on. So here I can see how many invoices and purchase requests I have been raised against that particular purchase category or particular project. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how easy it is for managers to be able to manage all of the approvals and at the same time have visibility into the spend. And the last one that I want to cover is, I'll just shift my browser in here. And this is where I'm now logged in as accounts payable. And basically, just want to quickly show you that if I'm an AP user that's logging into the system, I can go into the invoice tab. I've got complete visibility of all the invoices that are being processed within the system. And the system actually breaks it down by the workflow. So it's telling me how many are waiting to be verified in the data capture module, how many have yet to be assigned, how many are sitting with managers and are unapproved yet. So it lets you track all of those invoices in one single place. And on top of that, if I need to do an accounting review of all the invoices, I can go into the accounting review queue and then be able to search for invoices. So this is basically your master queue, which will give you visibility into all of your invoices. You can track what's happening with them, where they are in the approval workflow, when were they received, when were they sent into the approvals, what is the payment due dates, and the system is prompting you that these are over their payment due dates, etc. So it gives you lots of filtering capabilities. So I want to see all Dell invoices. I can just very quickly search for Dell invoices, and then it will show me all the Dell invoices here. So this allows you to centralize your AP function. You can track any invoices at any point in time. And hopefully this gives you an idea of of how the Concur system can significantly add value to your current AP process. So with that, I will switch back to the slide deck and hand over to Remco to take you through on the VATBox proposition with regards to managing your invoice.
Thanks, Imran. Yeah, so we'll be taking it from here, diving a bit more into the, let's say, the VAT details of the process. So first of all, VATBox fully integrates with Concur and especially, of course, also in this case, Concur Invoice. So this allows us, because of the full integration, to have all the data elements related to these invoices and these AP transactions. And from that, we can also, of course, validate certain parameters that are relevant for VAT and the VAT treatment of those invoices. So VATBox is offering an AP audit solution for VAT purposes, and that primarily focuses in first instance to find any foreign VAT that might have been charged on those AP invoices that are being processed through Concur Invoice. Now, when such invoices enter the solution and are being coded, there's basically different ways how that in the end also ends up, of course, in the ERP. Now, what we can audit is basically, depending on how the setup is being done, is roughly 3 elements. So first of all, what we see quite a bit if you look at foreign VAT on AP invoices, because there's no specific tax code for those transactions, it's coded to, depending of course when you're on SAP or any other ERP and what's then the logic of the tax code, under an out-of-scope tax code such as ZY or some other out-of-scope tax code. Now, of course, if you have coded those invoices on the tax code, they will kind of disappear in the big pile of out-of-scope tax codes, and it's quite difficult to then find back those invoices that are relevant for foreign VAT recovery. Now, what we then do is basically take all the transactions together with the tax codes from Concur Invoice and also the images, and we perform a full audit on those to find specifically those invoices that were coded to a 0 tax code, but still carry foreign VAT. In that audit process, we also check if the VAT that was booked on that invoice or charged by the supplier was correctly charged. If it's not correctly charged, we'll reach out to the supplier, of course, with the consent of the client in order to get such invoices reissued. In that case, of course, if it's reissued without VAT, then there's no further work to be done. It has to be rebooked, and of course the customer will get the refund of VAT directly through the supplier through that credit. However, where it's charged correctly, it will be VATBox then that on behalf of the client can submit those positions to the different tax authorities in order to obtain that VAT refund. That process will be fully supported by VATBox in terms of the submission, but also in terms of any questions that might come from authorities. I will dive into that a bit later. Then the second possibility, of course, is that the ERP does allow or does include a specific tax code for foreign VAT, which makes, of course, a bit easier to identify those invoices, but still we can run the full audit to make sure that those invoices were coded correctly, and still there's maybe not other invoices that have been overlooked. And just to give you some examples where we see that happening, is, for instance, a typical one is import transactions, where product is imported into the EU from non-EU destination, and a freight forwarder also acting as customs agent then will take care of this full import and import clearance. So on behalf of the importer of record, the transaction will be cleared and customs duties where applicable and also import VAT will be paid. We see this coming back on the invoice from, say, FedEx or DSV or one of the freight forwarders as a line item on the invoice. And that's typically something that gets easily overlooked when booking the invoice for AP purposes. So we'll track those invoices and those specific transactions to find those elements and find also the VAT back that's reclaimable for those transactions. As mentioned, other typical cases, of course, where VAT is incorrectly charged. We see it a lot still happening on services from sometimes smaller suppliers that are not fully aware of all the cross-border rules for place of supply for sometimes basically goods and services. We see it quite a bit, of course, where it's correctly charged on spare parts being shipped or tooling equipment. And also one of the common transactions is when events are centrally organized by, let's say, an office abroad in a foreign country. Let's say the third variant, where there's still something to track, of course, for the company, and where we will, of course, also match that information, is when there's an accrual booked for VAT for the specific invoice that carry the foreign VAT. So we see that specifically in cases where, of course, there's a high volume in foreign VAT, where, of course, assigning a tax code is a bit more easy to track specific invoices. There's also a possibility, of course, to book those to a VAT accrual account for specifically this purpose. Anyhow, however the invoice is booked, if it's booked under out of scope or there's some process in the company to flag those invoices, we'll still run through a full audit process to, of course, identify those invoices that were already flagged for this purpose, but also especially find those invoices that were not flagged. Then diving a bit more into the detail of the process. So as you can see, we first take, let's say, the information through the Concur API. So that allows us to get all the information. Then it's uploaded to our VATBox system, and we filter out all relevant transactions. And then there's a full audit review. So we have many different parameters we can double check and validate in order to come in our system to a VAT validation and a VAT treatment. Then we can compare that back with the information how the invoice book, which tax code was assigned, and if that's then properly assigned. So the result then is that either it's kind of approved transaction, so everything is correct and correctly booked, which would result then in a position for foreign VAT recovery, or it's incorrectly charged, where of course we have to then reach out back to the supplier. Can also be disqualified for multiple reasons, or maybe because the specific purchase is not eligible for VAT refund. And there's of course quite some cases that require more information. As you can imagine, if we as VATBox submit transactions to authorities, especially when looking at accounts payable transactions, typically these include higher values. And the invoice might be quite straightforward, with not a lot of detail, of course, about the transaction itself, but also the purpose of the transaction. So typically, we could get questions back, what happened to the purchase of a certain product, where it stayed in the country, whether it was shipped outside the country, what's the purpose, how it will be used, what's the life cycle, etc. So many different questions depending on the type of purchase that is performed. What we will always do, in order to also mitigate any tax risk for the client, is when we have, let's say, the full audit performed and we have the outcome, we'll validate it back with the client. And that's for the purpose to avoid any potential foreign VAT registration or any foreign VAT permanent establishment. So this is important, of course, for the client. You don't want to recover any VAT in a country where you could be then at risk for a VAT registration that you want to then mitigate. And first, of course, check with the business if the purchase was done correctly, if it aligns with your business strategy, and also, of course, how this maybe should be resolved together with your tax advisor and or local authorities to make sure, of course, you don't run into issues. That's, of course, something we want to prevent. So when that's all cleared and validated from your side, then we'll submit on your behalf, and of course, attend any questions coming from tax authorities. Following that, we'll keep track of the approvals. If there's a rejection, we'll object to it, and of course, sync with you also on any input required from your side to that point. Also, what we do afterward, after the approval, because it's not, let's say, always for all countries a logical step, next step, that even there's approval, we'll track if actually the funds are paid out by those respective tax authorities. If they're not paid out, then we'll start reminding them and chasing them for you to obtain, of course, your refund. Now, an additional feature here is the need more information module. So this serves basically two purposes. We can have cases where the invoice doesn't tell the whole story. Of course, there we can also search within the information we got from Concur invoice to enrich in that sense the data for the invoice and the background of the transaction. However, that's not always sufficient in all cases. So for those cases where we miss information or where there's a mistake on the invoice sent by the supplier, so it's missing, for instance, mandatory invoice details to meet the invoice requirements of the respective country, we'll reach out back to the supplier, and instead of sending them many emails, we created a platform to which the supplier will get a link, and on that platform he will see all the invoices that are related to that supplier, and then we, either we as in VATBox or the customer itself, can also assign such an invoice to either somebody internally to get some additional information, or to a respective supplier to add information to the transaction. So this is like an example how it would look like. So on one side, the supplier or the merchant would see the invoice. On the other side, there's questions they have to answer, and they can upload also additional supportive documents that can be, for instance, like a product sheet, purchase order, other supporting evidence in order to support the VAT refund on those transactions. So that, in a nutshell, is basically how we support Concur invoice. So on one side, of course, we try to validate, or basically through the audit, we filter out all transactions with foreign VAT. On the other side, given all the parameters and information that's available in Concur invoice, we can also check more broadly on zero transactions and domestic transactions to see if the data elements that are available align with, when we load those to the system, align with tax code that has been assigned. So this would lead then to, of course, on one side, efficiency in the AP process from invoicing processing, but also VAT compliance for the VAT booking of those invoices.
Thank you so much, Remco and Imran. We are out of time, so I will not go through the questions, but if you have, I will answer them individually. If you have any further questions, please contact VATBox or Concur, and we'll be happy to answer them. Thank you very much.